I want to make a puppy, but angry, and more heads, and all the eyes. They're also from the depths of hell, so let's get to it. Diving straight in, we'll build up a wire armature. I'm using my thickest wire since this sculpture might be a bit heavier than my previous ones. Then we can snap some foil over our wire frame and start bulking it out with clay. The aluminum foil helps keep our final sculpture less heavy and also saves my bank account from the cost of using too much clay. Once we have the general shape of the torso, we can add in our legs, and then start carving away all the excess clay and get everything smooth with various loop tools. Then we can start working in some of the broader details, starting with the ribs, then the vertebrae, and then after another round of smoothing, we can start in on the feet. To do this, we'll cut in some toes and then shape them out until we have separate digits. Then we'll shape and texture them with some ball styluses, before coming back and stabbing in some pre-baked claws into each toe tip. Now buckle up, because this is where it's going to get weird. We'll start by carving in some holes, gashes, and cuts into choice locations along the body, and then, once we have these larger marks positioned, we'll poke in some eye sockets into various spots that look like they need an eyeball, making sure to have a few varying sizes, because variety is the spice of eyes. Spice of life. First, we'll drop a pre-baked eyeball into each socket. I'm using white clay just to make it a little bit easier to see where each eye is. Then we'll build up the lids on each, varying in the intensity of the stares. Now let's make some headway, in the form of multiple heads coming out of the body and neck. Some of these heads, like the first one, will be more normal and wolfish. I use that term normal very loosely since this channel isn't really here for sculpting normal things. Each head gets more eyes than it should since I'm using the motto, when in doubt, add more eyes. I'll blend each head into the pre-carved marks from earlier in the sculpting process, and then start the intoothening. Each tooth is a pre-baked stabby of translucent clay, which will help the teeth look more like actual teeth when we get onto the painting stage. As you can see, none of these heads are fully complete, each in different stages of mutation. Every head erupting out of the hellhound's flesh like horrific, all-seeing growths. Slowly we'll add more and more heads and jaws, making each mouth gnarlier than the last. The head on the shoulder with the turned-up snout started creeping me out so much that I decided to make the concept again, but even worse, on one of the main neck heads, as you'll see shortly. The leg gets some of the least complete jaws, a sideways snarl carved into the left thigh, and a lonely bottom jaw in the right. Once we have the body heads finished, we'll shape up the tails. I mostly went with a simple tail-like design that we can texture later. Then we can get started on the actual heads coming out of the neck. You'll notice that the clay color is different here, and that's because I completely ran out of Super Sculpey Firm and couldn't find any more. So we're using this flesh-colored Sculpey to finish up our sculpture. These are the three biggest heads, though I overestimated at first how big I actually wanted them to be, so I'll have to resize and shape them smaller. I was inspired by the mythical three-headed dog Cerberus guarding the gates of Hades, as well as the demon dogs from Hellsing. Once I have the shapes built up, I'll cover the heads and the neck in dozens of eyeballs to continue with my all-seeing theme. Then once the eyeballs have their fleshy lids, we can break out the tums and start in on the mouths. My goal with these heads was to make them the most grotesque and menacing of all, especially with the teeth and gums, adding more pre-baked teeth in chaotically nasty locations, then peeling the gums up deep into the face on each of the three heads. This process looked even more vile because of the color of the clay, and I'm so deeply sorry. Ugh. Finally, we'll finish off the sculptures with some fuzzy puppy fur. To do this, I'll take one of my sculpting tools and etch a few thousand lines on every inch of skin that isn't mouth or eyes. After several hours of this tedium, I'll smooth all of these tool marks out with some alcohol. And then come back in and build up some thicker strands of fur in different locations to add some variety and height, which will hopefully make a big difference when we come in for the painting. But for now, they kinda look like gross fleshy leeches. Now that the fur is fur-fied, we're done with the sculpting of our hellhound, and we can do our first and final bake. Now that our puppy is nice and hard, we'll take out all the teeth so we can start on the painting. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but this monster has a lot of teeth. A lot of teeth. like a stupid amount of teeth. Unfortunately, I cracked and broke a lot of the gums during this process, which stinks, but I'll try and make the best of it. If anyone has any advice on how to avoid broken gums with these pre-baked teeth in the future, please let me know down in the comments below. I kept all the teeth organized using some labeled painter's tape, that way I can make sure each tooth can return to its home hole. This project in total had 216 teeth, and I have a feeling that my next few sculptures will be very toothless, since at this point, I don't even like looking at my own teeth. Once our teeth are fully removed, we'll give the body a black base coat, avoiding the eyes and mouths as best as I can. I definitely overpainted quite a bit, but I'll touch that up later. I accidentally broke off my favorite tongue, but I'll glue it back in the throat and pretend that this never happened. Then once that coat is finished, we'll come back in with a dry brushing in dark gray, then a tip tickling in pale gray, followed by the barest sneeze of white. This will bring out all of that wonderful texture that we spent so many hours lovingly imparting. Our beastie has a couple fully formed snouts, so we'll paint those black and then add a thin gloss varnish to make them look healthy and wet. Then we'll snap the eyes white, and make the mouths a pale, uniform flesh tone. They say that the eyes are windows to the soul, so for our soulless hellhound I'll paint them each a fiery, vibrant yellow. Once they're all uniform, we'll come back in with a series of maroons, reds, and oranges to make up the flaming iris. Then each eye gets a single black slit pupil. I'll repeat this for each eye until our dog is deblinded. Then after they've all had a chance to dry, I'll come back in with some UV resin to make each eye shine. Then we can move on to the fun part, the gaping maws. I'll repaint them all a darker pink and then make sure to break off the biggest tongue again. But this time 100% completely on purpose and definitely not by total accident. Then we can add a dark wash to sink into the crevices and shade the gums. Followed by a lighter pink dry brushing to highlight the texture and add some dimension. Finally, it's the moment we've all been waiting for. The Toothening Part 2, Tooth Be or Not Tooth Be. Each tooth gets put back into the matching gum holes with the assistance of some super glue to hold them firmly in place. This was honestly a pretty fun process, and I only had to remake a couple of the teeth that just wouldn't fit back in the hole for some unknown reason, or that I just lost somewhere in my apartment. Once the teeth are back in the mouths, we'll dirty them up with a sepia wash. Earth puppies don't have toothbrushes, and so I imagine that our mutated hell beast would be even worse off. After that's dry, we'll make our mouths glisten with some high gloss varnish, and then once that's dry but looking wet, we'll finish the monster off with some slobber. I'm using Fabri-Tac glue as my drool since it's nice and stringy and dries in these disgustingly wonderful strands. With that finished, let's get the beastie home. Our hellscape starts out as a rectangle of primed foam, but this is looking a little bit flat, so let's mix up a batch of texture, starting with paste, rocks, and more rocks, plus a special ingredient. I have this old coffee grinder and a few takeout chopsticks that I've been saving for a special occasion. I have no idea if this will work, but hey, we're gonna test it out. After a bit of grinding, we're left with some fibrous strands, splintery bits, and a few rounded edges left over, which is going to add some odd texture to the base. Then we'll add in our paste, rocks, and some black paint. Oops. Actually, the last of my black paint. This gets mixed up and then spread around on the foam until we have our dark rocky landscape that feels naturally unnatural. Once this is dry, we'll come back in with some dry brushing in gray and white to enhance our texture. My vision for this underworld was an unending series of damp tide pools in an ashy, barren field, so to do this we'll break out some Vallejo water effects and dye it a reddish pink. Then this gets piped into pools, and I'll pop each bubble and spread out the liquid with a heat gun. As the last bit of sparse detail, we'll add in a few bleached bones that I made off camera. But that's actually us finished. Let's check out our hell puppy. I hope you enjoyed this sculpture from your friendly neighborhood pet store. If you liked this video, thanks! I'll be making more like this every other week, so subscribe if you want to see more, and share this with everyone you know who loves dogs. And everyone who doesn't like dogs, I guess, since this was about as far from a dog as you can get. If you made it this far in the video, let me know which head was your favorite. I'll see you next time. Bark bark, woof woof. Ow?